A sealed letter hidden for nearly 30 years has shattered the monarchy. Diana's lost words, uncovered inside Kensington Palace, revealed chilling warnings and a message to Catherine that changed everything. Within days, Queen Camilla was forced out of Buckingham Palace. What was written in that letter left the royals shaken forever. The hidden letter discovered in Diana's former quarters. The renovation crew thought they were just restoring floorboards, until one small discovery shook the foundations of the monarchy. At Kensington Palace, inside what was once Princess Diana's private quarters, a royal housekeeper stumbled upon a sealed envelope tucked behind a loose panel beneath a window seat. Dust-covered, fragile, and marked with an unfamiliar wax seal, it had clearly not seen the light of day in decades. The letter was dated August 28, 1996, the very day Diana's divorce from Prince Charles was finalized. What made it extraordinary was its recipient. Written in Diana's unmistakable handwriting, in deep blue ink, the envelope was addressed simply to "My son's future queen." Initially believed to be a misplaced personal note, the envelope was handed over to royal archivists for authentication. Forensic experts tested the paper fibers, ink age, and seal composition. All matched Diana's documented stationery from the mid-90s. The results were undeniable. It was real, and it was never meant to be found by accident. Inside the envelope was a 4-page handwritten letter, bearing Diana's signature tone. Candid, heartfelt, laced with grace, but also caution. She spoke not just as a mother, but as a woman who had suffered betrayal, media torment, and institutional silence. She addressed her fears about power, about the palace, about Camilla. She described her anxiety about the influence Camilla might hold over the monarchy one day, calling her a woman who knows the game, but not the cost. Diana warned that the crown should never fall into the hands of those who mocked my pain. And most hauntingly, she ended with a sentence that would become history. If you are reading this, then truth has finally touched the throne. Sources say royal staff were stunned into silence. The document was immediately placed in the custody of the royal archives, but not before one trusted aide informed Prince William. And that's when the true impact began. Because the next person to read that letter would be the son she wrote it for. And it would change everything. William's emotional response to his mother's words. When the sealed envelope was quietly placed into Prince William's hands at Clarence House, he had no idea what he was about to open. Aides say he was alone when he first read the letter. He sat in his study, holding the pages with both hands, and as his eyes scanned his mother's handwriting, he didn't move for over 20 minutes. Eventually, he broke the silence. She knew. She always knew. That's all he said at first, according to one senior staffer who found him seated in quiet disbelief. William didn't weep publicly, but his eyes were red. His hands trembled slightly as he reread the final page. He reportedly folded it once more, placed it against his chest, and said softly, "She wrote this for Catherine." The decision that followed was swift and deeply personal. He didn't show the letter to King Charles, not immediately. Instead, William drove to Windsor and handed it directly to his wife. When Catherine read Diana's words for the first time, witnesses say she simply closed her eyes. No gasps, no tears, just silence. But behind that calm, a decision was already taking shape, a quiet resolve that would ripple through the monarchy. William told his closest aides that night, "This letter won't be hidden again." He knew the truth his mother had left behind was not meant to live in a locked archive. It was meant to set something right. It was meant to be the final piece of a puzzle she had never been allowed to complete. And that meant confronting the very people who had allowed history to repeat itself. The next morning, Catherine requested a formal audience with the Royal Household Council, and for the first time since Diana's death, her voice was about to be heard inside the halls that once silenced her. Because her letter had not only survived time, it had arrived right on time. Catherine confronts the royal household. It was a scene few inside Buckingham Palace will ever forget. On a rainy Thursday morning, Princess Catherine walked into a closed-door meeting with the Royal Household Council and brought Diana's voice with her. Sources confirmed the emergency session had been called at Catherine's request. Present were the Lord Chamberlain, senior courtiers, select members of the Privy Council, and a handful of longtime royal advisors. The tension was immediate. No one knew exactly what she intended to say. Then she pulled out the letter. In her calm, steady tone, Catherine began to read aloud select passages from the document Diana had written nearly 30 years earlier. Some in the room gasped. Others lowered their heads in silence. The words were devastating. Diana had written about being manipulated, isolated, and publicly replaced before the ink had even dried on her divorce. But it was her warnings that landed hardest. Do not let the crown fall into the hands of those who mocked my pain. A line that sent chills across the room. Catherine wasn't emotional. She was composed, clear, deliberate. According to an aide who was present, it was like she became Diana's voice, not angry, not accusatory, just undeniable. She reminded the council that her role as future queen wasn't about image or titles. It was about carrying forward a legacy that had been erased too soon. And that legacy, she made clear, had no place alongside Queen Camilla. One official told reporters later, Catherine didn't come to make threats. She came to awaken something that's been buried for decades. And awaken it, she did. By the end of the meeting, murmurs turned into consensus. Several senior courtiers formally advised that Camilla could no longer remain in her ceremonial role without damaging public trust or the crown's moral authority. For years, the palace had pretended that the wounds of the past had healed. But the letter made one thing clear. Those wounds were never closed. They were just hidden. Catherine left the room with her head high, her expression unreadable. But behind her, the entire course of the monarchy had shifted. The next step would fall to King Charles, and he wasn't ready. King Charles cornered by truth and loyalty. He sat in his private study at Clarence House, staring at a photograph of Diana, placed on his desk years ago out of habit, perhaps guilt. Then came the knock. It was William and Catherine, together, and they weren't there for a discussion. They were there for a reckoning. The letter was placed in Charles's hands. According to insiders, he read it silently, his face drained of color. By the time he reached the final line, "If you are reading this, then truth has finally touched the throne," his hands were visibly shaking. "Why now?" he reportedly asked, voice low. "Why now, when we've finally found peace?" But there was no peace. Not anymore. William, speaking as both son and future king, made it clear that the letter could not be buried again. Camilla's continued presence wasn't just controversial, it was corrosive. The people would never accept the monarchy's future if it clung to the sins of the past. Catherine didn't speak much. She didn't need to. The room was already filled with Diana's words that had pierced through decades of silence and ceremonial performance. King Charles was trapped between loyalty to his wife and the legacy of the woman he had lost, and perhaps never stopped loving. "I was trying to protect her," Charles reportedly said of Camilla, to which William replied, "And now it's time to protect the crown." The decision wasn't made that night, but the pressure became unbearable. Within hours, Princess Anne and Prince Edward were informed of the situation. Both reportedly stood with William. And by morning, an emergency meeting was scheduled. Camilla's future would be decided not behind closed doors, but in the open corridors of Buckingham Palace. Charles didn't sleep, because for the first time in his reign, the truth he had long avoided was standing right in front of him, and it wore the signature of Princess Diana. Camilla's outburst and sudden exit. The walls of Buckingham Palace hadn't heard screaming like this in years. It was just past midnight when Queen Camilla was finally told. She had been left out of the day's meetings, intentionally. But the news and the letter caught up to her. Sources say she was seated in her private sitting room when her senior aide entered, handed her a sealed envelope marked urgent, and waited. Moments later, her shriek echoed through the corridor. A witness described the outburst as volcanic. Camilla reportedly threw a crystal decanter against the fireplace, accusing Catherine of plotting from the shadows, and screamed Diana's name in rage. But the line that left the room cold was this: "She's haunting me. She always has." According to multiple palace insiders, Camilla immediately tried to contact a network of trusted royal journalists, aiming to spin the letter as a fabricated smear campaign from Team Middleton. But this time, palace security, under orders, intercepted all communication attempts. Her access to internal press channels was temporarily revoked. For Camilla, it was a first. Shortly after, senior aides, accompanied by 2 members of the Royal Protection Squad, informed her that she would need to vacate Buckingham Palace. Not permanently, not officially, but for the sake of peace. The tone was final. The message, crystal clear. By 4:00 a.m., a single black vehicle was seen leaving through the rear gates. Camilla sat in the back, expression hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. She carried only one suitcase. Her personal assistant followed in a separate car. They drove toward Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire, far from the glare of palace life. She had left Buckingham Palace in the dead of night, without ceremony, without farewell, and without power. What began as a whisper of doubt had now become a reckoning. Diana's letter hadn't just spoken to William. It had dethroned Camilla. But the story wasn't just playing out behind gates anymore, because by morning, the public had read it too. Public reaction. Diana's letter sparks national uprising. By dawn, the letter was no longer confined to palace walls. An anonymous source leaked selected excerpts to a respected royal journalist, and within hours, the words of Diana were everywhere. Headlines across the UK printed the same chilling phrase, "Do not let the crown fall into the hands of those who mocked my pain." What followed was nothing short of a national uprising. Outside Kensington Palace, a crowd formed within hours, growing from dozens to thousands. People held candles. Some wept. Others laid flowers beneath Diana's statue. The air felt electric, emotional, and heavy, with long-suppressed grief. All across London, candlelight vigils were held in Diana's name. Crowds began chanting, "Justice for Diana, grace restored." Haj Queen of Hearts, Hat Diana was right, and Haj Crown for Catherine trended globally. Within 24 hours, over 3 million people signed a petition demanding Camilla be stripped of all royal titles. The emotional reaction was overwhelming, not because people were shocked, but because they had always known. They had felt it for years. And now Diana's own words confirmed what the public had sensed in their hearts, that she had never been properly heard, and that Camilla's rise had always come at a cost. In towns across the UK, memorial murals began to appear overnight. Artists painted Catherine and Diana side by side, both wearing crowns, both smiling softly. Beneath them, a phrase written in gold, "A restoration of grace." Even those who had once supported Camilla found themselves shaken, because no amount of royal spin could erase the raw, haunting honesty of a mother's letter to her future daughter-in-law. And in one especially poignant moment, an elderly woman outside Buckingham Palace held up a handwritten sign that read, "You silenced her in life. You can't silence her in death." That single photo went viral in under an hour. The monarchy had experienced backlash before, but this was different. This wasn't about tabloid gossip or petty drama. This was about truth, about memory, about a reckoning 3 decades overdue. And at the center of it all stood Catherine, silent, dignified, and suddenly the most powerful woman in the monarchy. The nation wasn't just watching, it was standing. For Diana, for Catherine, and for a crown that finally felt like it belonged to the right woman. Princess Anne breaks silence and supports Catherine. Princess Anne has never been one for drama. She's the monarchy's steel spine. No nonsense, no sentimentality, just duty. But behind her famed reserve is a memory few have access to. And when Diana's letter surfaced, Anne did not remain silent. In a moment that surprised even the most seasoned palace watchers, Anne privately requested a meeting with Catherine. Not with Charles, not with William, just Catherine. The meeting was held in the Queen's Library at Windsor Castle. Only 2 aides were permitted inside. What followed, sources say, was a deeply emotional exchange between 2 women bound by honor and blood, but separated by decades of palace politics. Anne reportedly began by saying, she never wanted this war, but she knew it would come. Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, weathered at the edges, clearly personal. She placed it on the table between them. Inside was a page written by Diana herself, dated September 1994, during a weekend retreat to Balmoral. In it, Diana had written, "Anne is the only one who sees what's happening. She knows. One day, Catherine will need her." Catherine read the words in silence, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Anne looked at her and said quietly, "You're not alone, and you were never meant to be." That moment, private, unfilmed, unspoken, sealed a bond that had never existed before. Because for years, it was assumed that Anne had been cold toward Diana, and later indifferent toward Catherine. But this was different. Anne emerged from the meeting and made her thoughts known the only way she knew how, through action. The following morning, she gave a public statement during a visit to a naval base. It was brief, but it shook the palace. Truth always rises, and when it does, the rest must make way. Royal commentators called it the clearest signal yet that Anne had taken Catherine's side, and Diana's. It shattered the long-standing narrative that Camilla had unanimous senior royal support. But Anne didn't stop there. Behind closed doors, she met with the Royal Ceremonial Office and pushed for immediate changes in future state plans, including discussions about Camilla's removal from all symbolic duties. And she was heard referencing Diana's letter more than once, insisting it was not a scandal. It was a testimony. The quiet force of Anne's support tipped the scales permanently. Within days, 2 more senior advisors backed Catherine's position. Commonwealth figures began voicing concerns about Camilla's presence in future events. The momentum had shifted, and as the crown tried to contain the fallout, one man was left increasingly isolated: King Charles. Charles faces a crisis of legacy. It was supposed to be a reign of redemption, a closing chapter for a long misunderstood prince finally crowned. But the moment Diana's letter surfaced, everything Charles had tried to build began to unravel. Public trust plummeted. Tabloids and broadsheets alike resurrected the Panorama interview, playing it side by side with Diana's handwritten words. Media commentators drew lines between her 1995 cries for help and the 1996 letter buried within the palace. The parallels were undeniable, haunting. Across the Commonwealth, pressure built fast. Australian media ran scathing editorials, suggesting the monarchy had failed to protect its most beloved figure. In Canada, an emergency parliamentary session included a motion to reassess symbolic alignment with future ceremonial representatives. One lawmaker didn't hold back. If the crown can't honor the truth of its past, why should we trust its future? Inside the UK, the monarchy's media arm launched a full-scale containment effort, but it was too late. Royal historians began re-evaluating Charles's reign. Think pieces emerged titled "The King Who Lost the People" and "Camilla's Rise, Charles's Fall." And then came the physical collapse. According to palace insiders, Charles suffered a stress-related health episode during a late-night call with his personal secretary. Doctors were called immediately. He was placed under medical observation at Highgrove House, far from London's chaos. The official statement claimed it was fatigue, but insiders confirmed what everyone feared: the stress of Camilla's exile, Diana's letter, and the nation's backlash had finally broken him. For the first time, whispers inside the palace grew louder. Can he continue? He remained silent in public. No statements, no appearances. Just a ghost within the halls he once ruled with formality and ritual. And outside, the people no longer called him king. They called him Diana's mistake. The legacy he hoped to repair was now eclipsed by a woman long gone, and a future queen who refused to let that woman be forgotten. Catherine's quiet ascent to power. While the monarchy reeled from scandal, grief, and a crisis of trust, Princess Catherine rose, gracefully, silently, and unmistakably. No public speeches, no personal statements, just presence. In the days following Camilla's departure, Catherine began stepping into royal spaces once reserved for the Queen Consort. She accompanied William to state functions, hosted dignitaries at Kensington Palace, and stood beside global leaders with the poise of someone already wearing the crown in everything but name. Aides noticed subtle changes. Her name appeared at the top of briefings. Event schedules were routed through her private secretary. Some palace insiders even began calling her, quietly, respectfully, Her Majesty in Waiting. Then came the moment that removed all doubt. During a formal reception at St. James's Palace, Catherine arrived wearing a soft white gown embroidered with roses and lions, the symbols of Diana and the crown. Her earrings once belonged to the late Queen Elizabeth II. Her bracelet to Diana. It was a visual message to the world. Legacy meets future. The press took notice. So did the people. And so did the designers. Royal dressmakers at Hardy Amy's were reportedly commissioned to begin crafting coronation-ready regalia. Fabric dyed in Windsor blue, tiara molds being refined, and ceremonial robes subtly altered to reflect a new era, Catherine's era. Meanwhile, Catherine focused her energy on a private project no one saw coming. She launched a new charitable initiative under the Diana Foundation name, dedicated to legacy, healing, and institutional accountability. The focus: women and children caught in the crossfire of silence and power. Insiders say Catherine's first order of business was to reach out to the original staff of Diana's favorite causes. She reportedly told one of them, "This isn't a tribute, it's a continuation." Her public approval soared, over 90% across the UK and Commonwealth. Even royal skeptics praised her steady hand. Commonwealth nations issued joint statements calling her the stabilizing face of the crown. Camilla, by contrast, remained at Ray Mill House, seen only once since her removal, curtained behind a window. Charles, still under medical care, made no effort to reintroduce her into public life. And, as the palace prepared quietly for the inevitable transition, Catherine stood where no other royal woman had stood in decades, above controversy, beyond comparison, and fully accepted by the people. But one final moment remained. A line that echoed louder than any speech or ceremony ever could. And it came from the woman who had made all of this possible. The letter's final words, and Diana's last victory. The Royal Archives didn't want it published, but William made the call. He insisted the final paragraph of Diana's letter, the one line no one outside the palace had yet seen, be released to the public in full. And on a quiet Friday morning, Buckingham Palace issued a single, unadorned statement. No royal crest, no photograph, just one paragraph written in Diana's familiar handwriting, now read by millions. If you are reading this, then truth has finally touched the throne. My story was not the end. She is. And if she stands with grace, then the crown will finally mean something again. It was signed simply, Diana, August 28, 1996. The impact was immediate. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace once more, not in protest, but in reverence. Candles were lit, white roses laid down, and hand-painted signs held high. Truth has touched the throne. The crown finally means something again. Street murals now showed 3 generations: Diana, Catherine, Charlotte. In classrooms, children were taught not about scandal, but about legacy, truth, and dignity. Historians called it the final word of a woman the world refused to forget. A spiritual correction of history. A royal chapter, finally closed not by death, but by purpose. And so it was that Diana's voice returned not with bitterness, but with power. Not with noise, but with quiet victory. She had feared being erased, but in the end, she erased everything that tried to replace her. Camilla was gone. Charles was silent. Catherine stood tall. And in the heart of a kingdom once divided, a crown was made whole again, by the woman who never got to wear it. Diana's last line wasn't just a sentence, it was a coronation. Diana spoke from beyond the grave, and the palace finally listened. Camilla is gone, Charles is silent, and Catherine now carries the crown Diana was denied. One letter changed the course of history, not with scandal, but with truth. In the end, Diana didn't need revenge. She just needed to be heard.